So I almost walked out of my church sermon this weekend. I have never felt like that in my entire life. I am sitting there, and it's kind of been building for a few years. I will say that it really kicked off during lockdown because I was angry that churches closed during lockdown, and ours was no exception. And I was really upset that our church had closed, and and there's a lot of things that our church does with the kids and women's clinics and things like that. And I was mad that all these services were stopping under bunk science, right? And then things reopened, etc. And I noticed, the language had been kind of shifting. And I think I don't want to put my pastor on blast or anything like that, because I believe I'm very Book of Matthew about this. I want to go, or not Book of Matthew. I'm very, I agree with Paul's teaching. You take care of this, behind the scenes, and, you talk to people within the church. And then when all else fails, then you can go public. But I've been talking to a lot of friends of mine, and I feel like there's like I feel like there's a major problem with Church of Christ pastors, particularly lately, but a lot of problems with pastors in general. And there's been this language that's been seeping into these churches. I don't like mega churches. I don't like mega churches because I feel like it is they bash Catholicism while they want to make their own non-Catholic papacy. That's what I feel like corporate worship and mega churches are. I'm like, stay true to your mission, or just, don't bash, I don't get the criticism. So we're sitting in the sermon, and it had been building for a little bit. And my pastor says that he just goes right into it. He's like, I want a fair and safe border. He said it twice. And I looked at my youngest son, who has zero tolerance for any of this. I don't want my church to be politicized in favor of my beliefs or against them. It should just be scripture. There's no politicization about that. Either be scripture and just preach from the Bible, or don't open your mouth. And there's a reason why the New Testament, it talks about the responsibility that shepherds have. And, I'm sitting there listening to this, and and my husband was not happy. My kids were not happy. And there was zero differentiation made between people who come legally and people who come illegally. And the intimation that the pastor gave in a very sloppy way of presenting this was that essentially, if you have a problem with the complete deluge at the border and the complete unfettered crossing of every single person, then you're a racist. And the church has been really trying to push to expand ethnicity in the church, or diverse ethnicity, etc. And I think that when churches push things too hard, you make an idol of things, and they're making an idol of all of these other things other than what they should be talking about in scripture. But I was really, I was like, what is a fair and safe border? And then he misrepresented and said, these asylees that are coming over. Do you realize that asylees are such a tiny fraction of people that are coming over? And there's a reason for that. When someone comes over as an asylee and that's processed as such, there are certain things that kick in because of that. That's why it's not semantics. Language matters because certain legal protections and certain parts of the law are triggered when certain words are used. And when people who say it's a game of semantics, the people who say that either are too stupid to have this debate, they don't know enough about the law to lecture about it, or they're completely clueless about the laws that make up the system in this republic. I mean, words matter for a reason. And there's a tiny percentage of these people that are coming across the border that are actually asylees. I told you about the woman that I spoke with. She's a businesswoman, and I don't want to say her name, and I don't want to say what her business is, but they were from a South American country. And when she was a child, she and her mother and sibling had to flee in the dead of night and seek asylum protection. One of her father and brother had a construction company, and the brother got roped into money laundering for the cartel. And when he passed away, the father discovered, it's like a television series. The father discovered it and was like, and was a devout Christian, and was not going to allow this, was not going to do it. And if he had to die as a way to stand up against a cartel, that was going to happen. So they killed him. They bombed her house. She said that when they were leaving, she was looking at her chart out swing set when they were fleeing, and they came to the United States as asylees. There's a cap on how many asylees the United States can accept in a single year, and it's a very small number. So when you have most of these people coming across the border are young, military-aged men. In fact, they're predominantly young men, and it's not just men coming from Latin American countries. There are Chinese nationals coming in. There are Middle Eastern nationals coming in. There are African nationals coming in. And when you have every Tom, Dick, and Harry claiming asylum status, what about the people who actually are asylees, because they do exist, that are turned away because it's capped? That's what none of these people realized. And I'm sitting here listening to my pastor just toss this like it's beads at Mardi Gras without any actual full force of knowledge behind it. You can't just say things that you think validate your bias. And as a shepherd, you have a greater responsibility to your flock than that. And I get doubly aggravated because, I'm like, there's the reason why Paul was telling women to be silent in the church. I get mad because I'm like, who else is going to speak up and say something about this? I was looking at a sea of men sitting there in that sanctuary, and not a single one of them, aside from my husband and the men sitting with me, were disgruntled at the lies that were being spouted from behind the pulpit. There is something going wrong with our churches. Yes, our country, but I think it started in our churches. I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm like, I cannot believe the venom that is being spat. For what? This is not, you can say that you want safe, legal border crossings. And it is biblical to respect the laws of your land. Book of Romans highlights this. It is absolutely biblical to respect the law of the land. You know what isn't biblical is to misrepresent and to castigate people sitting there in your pews who are going there to learn about Jesus, and to castigate them and impugn their characters and yoke them to the moral failing of bigotry because you don't know the facts of the matter. I was on fire Sunday. If people ever doubted the existence of God, his hand was on my head, keeping me seated, because I was about ready to shoot through that roof. I was livid. And I still am, if you can't tell. I'm at listening to him say this stuff. And that wasn't the only thing. He said stuff like this before. I remember there was another time. Botham Jean was a black man who was shot and killed. You remember the whole story of Botham Jean. He was in his own apartment. There was a woman. She was a police officer, Dallas PD. She came back. She pulled like an 18-hour shift or something crazy. Walked into the wrong apartment. She thought it was her apartment, and it wasn't. The door was unlocked. It was Botham Jean. I think he was like eating ice cream or something in his own kitchen, and she shot and killed him. And it was a big thing. And it was already a bad situation enough. And yes, she was in the wrong. She killed him. We talked about that endlessly on this program. But what didn't help was when our pastor got up on stage and said, yes, as we know, more black people are killed by police every year. I'm like, that's not even supported by statistics. That's not even supported by FBI figures. Why would you go up there and misrepresent things and further incite and divide? That is not a hallmark of Christ, nor is it a sign of a good shepherd. It's venomous, and I question the motivation behind it. And I am tired of having to sit in a church service and try to dig through the pastor's political bias to get to the heart of the message that he's delivering. Now, we had a debate in our family. I'm like, well, what do we do? Because I'm wanting to leave. I'm done. We have some members of our family, my oldest son too, who's very temperate. And I was like, well, the church is under attack as well. The pastor's under attack. He's not infallible. I'm like, I agree. Well, shouldn't you want to help him and get him on the right path? I agree. I tried that before, though. After the line that he had said about the police shooting deaths, I wrote, I don't like inaccessible pastors. I shouldn't have to go through, for people that criticize the Catholic Church, I shouldn't have to go through a million different levels of hierarchy just to talk to my pastor. Never got a response. I don't expect a response because of what I do. I expect a response because I'm a member of the congregation. And I had a legitimate criticism, and I brought receipts. Never heard anything. I finally got like an email back, oh, thanks for the letter, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, are you serious? I have a problem with mega churches. I have a problem with corporate worship. I have a problem with churches that bash everything else. And we don't like the Pope, we don't like Catholicism, we don't like this or that. But we're going to sit here and create that, but we're different because we're not Catholics. We're going to create the non-Catholic papacy with corporate churches here in the U.S. I get aggravated by all of it. And I'm aggravated with my own church right now. I'm aggravated with the state of the kingdom on earth. And I don't know. I don't plan on going back next Sunday. I don't know if you guys have experienced something like this in your church. And I do think that, yes, you got a responsibility, you stand up for your pastor, all this other stuff. But what happens when they're not receptive? What happens when they don't want to listen? What happens when their hearts have hardened because of political extremism?